Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to my weekly live chat. If you're joining me live, I'm so glad that you're here. I go live almost every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central right here on my YouTube channel, so you can always pop back in. Well, right now we're going to do an Ask Me Anything kind of live chat, and Jessica is here monitoring the chat. She's kicking out the spammers, writing down the questions, and she'll hand them to me throughout the live chat so I can answer them. So anything. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make it up. I'm really good at BS. No, I'm just kidding. Couple things until the questions come in. First, an update on our Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. For those of you that might be new to the live chat, we are getting ready to launch a free video series. It's like a free class with yours truly, and that's starting January 2nd. And up to this point, all the products, exclusive products I designed for the challenge have been available for pre-order. But hallelujah, it's a Christmas miracle. The product has come in, and Jessica and I have been cutting and shipping and just going crazy here. So good news, orders are going to start going out. I think between yesterday and today, Jessica and I and some of the staff have filled over 600 orders. So we're a little tired, a little loopy. So very, very excited about that. So if you've been patiently or impatiently waiting, it is on its way. It's kind of crazy. These are the days I wish we were like an Amazon fulfillment plant, but we're not. The only real, truly full-time employees are Jessica and I. Here at the building where all of our events take place, all the shipping, filming, all that stuff, at any given day, the most people will have here is like 4 or 5. So it truly is a small business. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support and patience. And again, those orders, the mail guy came and picked up the first big load, and thankfully he didn't turn around and walk right back out. I love our mail guy. So anyway, very exciting news. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you'll have to check out the link in the description box. We're getting ready to start a free video series January 2nd. It's not too late to order the product. We're shipping, and we'll get it out to you. So that being said, this is actually the last live chat for this year. So I'm going to be out of town the next couple weeks, celebrating the holidays. So last live chat, the first video in the free series is going to come out January 2nd, and the next live chat will be January 4th. And that live chat, I'll be kind of recapping what's in the tutorial or the video tutorial, answering your questions, kind of going into a little more detail that's kind of difficult to do in a short YouTube video. And trust me, I have a lot to say about dot-to-dot quilting. You might look at the first video and think, dang, that's all we're learning. But I'm telling you, as we build off of it, it's mind-blowing. The elaborate looking designs you can create really, really easily. So even if you're like, nah, I don't know about machine quilting, just watch the videos and see if it's something you might want to tiptoe into. So again, challenge product is shipping. No more live chats for this year. I'll see you next year for our next live chat, January 4th, and the first video in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series, January 2nd. And again, if you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, check out the link in the description box, and it'll have all the details there. So thank you. All right, so ask me anything. Usually, if you're new to live chat or this is your first time popping by, I usually give some kind of tutorial or pictures or helpful hints or something machine quilting related. But this week we're just going to do a Ask Me Anything type of thing since I have been shipping products like crazy. So a couple questions that came up in the type chat before we started. Somebody asked, what can we do to make our quilts lighter in weight? Now, I didn't know if it meant like lighter in like physical weight or like lighter in warmth. Lighter in weight is going to be all about the batting. So if you want a nice lightweight quilt, something that's more for warmer months, using a lower loft batting is going to be a great option. If you want something super light, Quilter's Dream Orient is amazing. It's a silk bamboo blend, but you could probably guess by silk and bamboo, it's a little bit more expensive. So cotton will also work great. So loft is just speaking about, the height of the batting, for lack of a better word. And so the lower the loft, generally the lighter it will be. Not always the case, but definitely kind of gives you a good rule of thumb. And there was another batting question, so like 2 batting questions. What's the difference between Quilter's Dream 80-20 blend batting and Quilter's Dream Puff? What's the advantages or disadvantages? And so I did a whole live chat on batting, so you might have to go back and kind of dig that out through my YouTube channel. But 80-20 is a blend. It has, I think, 80% poly, 20% cotton. It might be flipped. But it gives you a little bit of both of the benefits. Polyester batting, which sounds gross, but is actually not as bad as it sounds, has a nice drape, but it doesn't retain a memory, so it doesn't wrinkle as much as like cotton would. But if you want a little bit of that cotton in there for, the warmth, the natural fiber, that crinkly little bit of look to it. So that's a little bit of a blend, is kind of the best of both worlds in one batting. Whereas Quilter's Dream Puff is talking about the loft. It's puffier, so it's going to give you more of that comforter-ish type of look without necessarily more weight. So the Quilter's Dream Puff, if you were to look at it, you can kind of see that it's spongy almost looking. You can kind of not see through it, but it's just not as dense as like the poly. So the best thing I could suggest is, if you're curious about battings, try to order a couple and just see what you like the feel of. Ultimately, the most important thing when it comes to batting is using a high quality batting, because you don't want that batting to beard and come through your quilt as you're going. So those are the two questions I had. I don't know, any other questions coming through, Jessica? She said, oh yeah, just drop them to me. I'm glad that normally before the live chat, I go on the type chat and answer, we talk and chit chat. I'm glad I kind of didn't get around to doing that this week because I was filling orders, but it's just been crazy. So be sure to check in earlier if you can. Do I need a special foot for my ruler work on my long arm? I would say yes. Now, can you technically quilt on your long arm with a ruler without a ruler foot? Yes, you technically can. But it only takes one time of hitting that ruler, breaking the needle, and throwing your machine out of time to make you wish you had just bought the foot. So it's well worth the investment. That was the ruler feet that come out for the long arms. When I started long arming back in the day, that wasn't an option. So I have jumped, hit a couple of my rulers over the years. But you don't need one, but you need one, if that makes sense. So there you go. Will there be a new ruler with this challenge? No. So no new rulers with this challenge. We're keeping it nice and simple. When I'm demonstrating on a sewing machine, I'm going to show you how to quilt with and without a ruler. And when you look at the sample, you might see a little bit of a bobble, but remember, we're going for straight-ish. However, on a long arm, we're going to be doing a lot of diagonal lines, and quilting diagonal lines on a long arm is darn near impossible for me. If you think about it, the wheels that we have working, one wheel's going horizontal, one's going vertical, engaging them both to go on a diagonal is kind of like doing that with an Etch-a-Sketch, if that means anything to you. So I will use a ruler on the long arm. I'll talk about that in the first video, but really any straight edge ruler will work, whether it's a straight part of a ruler that has multiple things on it, whether it's a long one, a short one, you can make it work. So you'll see a little bit of quilting with and without the ruler, but just know that I usually quilt with a straight ruler. I did a whole video series, a whole free motion challenge on machine quilting with rulers. So if you're excited to start the dot to dot free motion challenge, you can check that out to get a little primer on it if you're not comfortable with quilting with rulers. But it's definitely great to have that straight edge ruler, but there won't be a new ruler for this one. When determining the quilting, do I mark it out? This is such a good question. Like when I'm getting ready to quilt, I'm picking up the designs, how much of that do I plan ahead of time? I'm guessing that's what that question means. And it's kind of like the process, right? Like, what is my process? It sounds so, official. In the beginning, when I started long arming, I couldn't visualize the path. I couldn't imagine what those designs looked like on the quilt. So I would have done a lot more marking back then. But the more I work with the designs, the more comfortable I am with visualizing that. And the analogy that I have for that, because I got an analogy for everything. If I have a brand new quilter come into my quilt shop and they see a quilt that is black and white, and they think, "Ooh, I don't like black and white." They're like, "I don't like that quilt." They can't imagine that quilt in any other colors because they haven't worked with a lot of colors or fabrics. Whereas a quilter that has, a lot of fabric experience can come in and say, "Ooh, I can imagine that quilt in purples or yellows." And it's the same with machine quilting. So if you're starting out and you're like, "Oh, I'm never going to get to a point where I don't have to mark everything," just know the more you work with it, the easier it will be. At this point in my quilting career, I will mark registration lines. And so we will see this in the dot to dot challenge as well. In the very first video, I'm talking about, how much do you want to mark? How do you mark out these points? And if it helps you to have a roadmap, then do it. Mark out the steps, definitely. If you think, I could probably wing it, then try it. I think so much of machine quilting, and really any creative outlet, is kind of finding what works for you. And if you're new at machine quilting or new at a creative endeavor, you might be thinking, "I don't know what works for me." Just start trying stuff, and you'll figure it out pretty quick. It's like, how do you know if you like Brussels sprouts? You try them and you figure that out. So I do mark some registration lines, but not the whole design. Now, this wasn't a question that was asked, but one of the downfalls of marking out all the design is sometimes it can be hard to see where to go next, especially with dot-to-dot quilting when we have a lot of lines. If we mark everything out and you're like, I don't remember where to go. So you can mark as you go. That's always an option too, maybe to transition in between the two. So maybe I mark the first step and quilt it and mark the second step. So just know that there's different things you can do that will make you feel comfortable. So whatever you will do is what you should do. And I'm definitely not here to tell you, you have to do it one way or the other. What do you do when both sides of your quilt are bigger than your long arm base? Both sides of your quilt. I guess the frame maybe is what we're talking about. If your quilt is bigger than your frame, that's what I'm going to guess. If you have the standard frame, like where you roll up the layers of the quilt, and I know this is not helping you visualize what I'm talking about, in general, you can't go wider than your frame. Now, there are workarounds. I'm not even going to try to talk through them. I've never even tried them, so I don't know. So there's this is such a hard thing because I sell handy quilter machines, and when somebody asks me what machine should I buy, I always have to be really careful because I'm not trying to sell anything, but I always say get the biggest frame that you can fit. Truly, even if you think I will never use a 12-foot frame, I don't make quilts that big. It's just nice to have room for your machine off to the side, and you can turn your quilts on the side, and it's all that stuff. And you won't run into situations like that. Again, I know that's not a very good answer. It's hard to talk through that with just my hands, but just know there's options there. Sorry I couldn't help you with that one. Am I planning to teach in Great Britain in the future? I have, there's some things in the works. I'm talking about, I was out for a Festival of Quilts, and the Handy Quilter dealer that hosted me out there was talking about having me come out again. So as soon as we have some details, I'll let you know. I definitely hope to, because traveling is one of my favorite things, and traveling and teaching, oh my gosh, don't even get me started. It's like the highlight of my life. So any tips for quilting something bigger than a lap quilt on a domestic? Oh man, nothing like the good old smush and push, right? You got a big old quilt and a little machine. Here's the good news. You can quilt any size quilt on your sewing machine. It might not feel like it, but you can. Tip 1, you want everything up. Don't let anything hang off the edge. We are already fighting gravity. We don't need to fight it more. And that's a struggle I have, especially when I'm filming, because my quilt will work its way off the edge of the table, and I'm trying to film and teach and trying to wrestle it. So wad it up, throw it over your shoulders, just get it up. Don't let it hang down. Another thing you can do is try to just focus where you're at. I know it can be like overwhelming to look at the whole big picture, but just kind of take chunks out of it and work through it, and it will pass. So another option you have, and I hope this makes sense. So one thing you could do if you have a really large quilt, when you're making your quilt sandwich, you could maybe put batting in just the middle third of your quilt. Quilt that section, then move your quilt over, put another third batting, put it over, baste it, and quilt that section, and then do the same on the other one. So it's not really like a quilt as you go, but basically you're just adding the batting when you get to that area, because the batting truly is what really bulks that up and makes it heavier. I know that's a quick rundown, but no, there is ways to do it. Another option you have is if you're working with a small threaded machine, you can maybe turn it where it's facing you, like perpendicular to you, so you have a little bit more movement. And last tip, if you can get an extension table, really helps. Extension table or a table where your machine sets down into it just gives you more of a platform to keep it up there. Hopefully that helps. Lots of wine also helps too. Is the dot-to-dot backing blue, or can you choose a different color? It is. It's blue with purple. So I think last challenge we had, one challenge we had purple, one challenge we had blue, and this time we did blue and purple. You cannot pick the batting. It's just too much to keep track of, especially for ordering purposes. But if you wanted a different color, we do have coordinating yardage you could purchase. But now the backing kit that we sell is probably like that. Good, a lot of questions coming through. Awesome. When your top has a lot of white and the back is black, what bobbin thread color do you use? First of all, if somebody else gave you that quilt, you ask them why they hate you so much. No, I'm just kidding. So I always try to match the thread color to the top. My theory is you can only worry about one part of the quilt. You want to worry about the front or the back. So if I had a white top, black quilt, I'm going to do white in the bobbin. That's because when you're using those contrasting threads, there's going to be a point where those threads join, and you're going to be able to see it sometimes in the quilt. Perfect example I have for this, way back ago in the day, I did this quilt for my father-in-law. It was white on the top, blue on the bottom, and I tried exactly that, and I'm sure you can imagine what happens. The blue showed up on the top, and I was like, ugh. So does that mean, it does mean that you will see your quilting on the back with that contrasting thread. Great. It's like 2 quilts for the price of 1. If you don't like that, you're going to want to pick a backing that is similar to the color as the top, and if you don't want to see the quilting all on the back, then get something that's a busier fabric. So now, that's my opinion, and I'm only the expert in my opinion. So of course, you can do exactly what you want. You know, if the top was white and the back is black, but it's a busier fabric, you probably won't see the thread as much. So there is some wiggle room in there, but for the most part, I just worry about the top. But you can worry about that for yourself. Do I need a table attachment for the long arm for ruler work? This goes right along with the do I need a ruler foot. You don't technically need one, but it really, really, really helps. So the ruler base takes, if you think of the long arm base right there, it's like this. And if you have a ruler that's longer, that's going to wiggle. And that's when the ruler comes up and hits the needle, breaks the needle, breaks the ruler, you pee your pants. It's just not a great thing. So that ruler base takes it and makes it a little bit longer so your ruler is steady. I leave the ruler base on my machine 100% of the time. I never take it off. I don't have any trouble with the drag because I like to go ruler work and not ruler work. I like to switch between the two very often. So if you have a small throated machine and you're like, oh, I might lose an inch of space because of the ruler, you could take that ruler base off. But again, I cannot stress it enough. It only takes one time of throwing your machine at a time that you're like, it would have been cheaper to buy the ruler foot and the ruler base. So that's totally something you have to work with, but you can figure that out. All right, do I like to float my quilt tops? Yes. So when I talk about floating tops, I'm talking about on the long arm, and I'm talking about I don't pin the quilt top to the leaders. So the backing, I should do a video on this sometime or a live chat on it. So the backing is pinned, it's rolled up, but my top is just hanging down. Now the reason I do it that way, there's several, but the main one is that's how I was taught. The second one is it's faster. So I don't have to pin the top. I can quickly load that quilt and get to moving. I also like that I can access the batting really easily. If there's a wrinkle in the batting, I can just raise that quilt up and smooth it out. If I'm working on a quilt and I notice there's some threads that are showing through white background, I can easily get under there. One of the drawbacks is that I have to manage that as I'm going. If I just roll up the quilt and I don't worry about how it's progressing, I might get borders that touch the ground, but the center doesn't. So every time I advance it, I just make sure that it's progressing correctly. It's not sucking up in the middle. There are clamps now that you can use to help hold that in place. And so that definitely helps. So yeah, if you're like, oh, I want to try it, start with a smaller quilt, a baby quilt, and just see how you like it. I will say probably the biggest benefit for me, is mental. When I'm working on a quilt, especially a large quilt, as I watch that quilt progress, it's just such a great feeling. And when the quilt comes off of the floor, I know I'm almost to the end. So again, it sounds silly when I say it out loud, but it's just knowing your personality and your strengths and playing to them. I know that's mine. I like to see the progression so I don't get, distracted and do something different. So those are the why I like to do it. Again, if you have maybe like animals or you have little people at home and you don't want the quilt hanging down, that would be a great option. If you don't want to worry about, as you progress, then just pin it. So there's no right or wrong way. I always tell my new long arm owners, if it works, it works. So getting ready to do some thread painting on cotton canvas. Do I have a needle recommendation? The needle size you use depends on your thread. So check with the manufacturer and see what size needle they suggest. Cotton canvas, I think, will quilt no problem, and so I don't think that would affect it. But if you found, like if it was a looser weave, I'm not sure what cotton canvas is, but if it's a looser weave, maybe a ballpoint needle might be helpful if you're on a long arm. But really the thread is what determines the eye of the needle. So hopefully that helps. Any suggestions when working with stencils? Stencils are great. When you're marking out the design, again, it shows you the path that you can follow. It lets you kind of see where you're going, especially when you're, working an all-over design, or even some of the stencils that I'll be showing in the Dot to Dot Challenge for those registration lines. There really is no big deal to it. You lay them down, you mark them, and then you move on. I would say what you're using to mark the stencils with is more important. So just make sure you're testing your markings tools. And I like to use the pounce pad to mark them out. The problem with the pounce pad is if I'm going to be shifting the quilt a lot, if I'm not going to quilt it right then, that chalk can kind of move. So if that's the case, I might mark it out with a water-soluble pen. But really, sorry guys, I hit a button and then it went gray. I was like, oh man, sorry. Anyway, so really no, there's no big deal with the stencils. They're great and handy to have around to help you, and just, collect all the stencils. They're lots of fun. Do I have a specific marking pen or pencil that I recommend for the challenge? Look, I totally did not see that question, by the way. Like, it just kind of rolled into it. So I was going to see if I had my stuff handy. I probably don't. So any marking tool will work. I don't want to say you have to use a certain thing. Of course, I don't have it right here. I'm going to be using throughout the challenge, my favorite marking tool is the pounce pad. It's a chalk pad that you just quickly mark the stencils out. I like it because it's fast. It's not super thick and it comes off nice and easy. I'll also be using my Mark Be Gone water-soluble pen. Now, I know there's other newer, cooler marking things out there, but I'm an old dog with new tricks, and I've always used the Mark Be Gone, and I'm just gonna stick with that. Whatever you use, you can use a chalk pencil, you can use, a friction pen if you want, whatever you already use. There's no set thing. Just don't use the air-soluble marker. So when I started long arming, I quilted a quilt for a customer and they wanted their name quilted in the border. So I took the time to mark out, printed out letters, marked it all out, not realizing the purple pen is an air-soluble pen. And when I came back the next day, it was gone. And I thought maybe I had been smoking something or drinking too much, because I'm like, where did it go? Oh yeah, it's a air-soluble pen. So there you go. I had my quilt long arm quilted. The quilter trimmed it to the edge. Ooh, the whole quilt is 2.5-inch squares. How would you bind it to not use up much of the first square? Okay. Oh, so many things there. First of all, when I quilted for customers, I would never ever trim their quilts. I could say it's because I didn't want this to happen, but really it's because it took time and I didn't want to take the time to do it. Oh, man, okay. And then how would I bind it? I'm the wrong person really to ask about binding. To not that front, Jessica's back there laughing because she knows this is true. I think you're just going to have to bind it and just cut off that little bit of that square. I'm sure there's some creative workarounds. And honestly, if you're watching and you're like, oh no, I got the idea, leave a comment on the video because I'm sure that will be helpful. The only thing I could think of is sewing an extra piece to the back, but that sounds horrible. So I don't know. And one of these days I should do a live chat on quilting for business, because quilting for customers, this is why communication is so important. So now you know to tell your long arm quilter, hey, don't do that. And I'm not saying you didn't communicate with wrong. I meant back and forth, everybody. So there you go. So sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you than that. Do you have to drop your feed dogs when quilting? They need to be not operating. So either drop them or cover them. So when I'm quilting, sometimes I'll forget to drop them, but my Supreme slider is over it and it doesn't matter. For the most part, I'd say just drop them. But if they're covered, that's fine too. I have actually filmed whole videos for the challenge with my feed dogs up. It's not as easy to free motion quilt that way. If you think about it, those feed dogs are grabbing it and you're trying to move the fabric around. So yeah, go ahead and drop them. If you don't have the ability to drop them, you want to cover them up. So with a Supreme slider or even index cards. That's why I say cover them up, because some of the older machines, or maybe some models that don't have all the bells and whistles, won't have the ability to lower the feed dogs. So just cover them up and then go ahead and quilt. Do I have a starting kit of pre-wound bobbins to purchase? I do not. So we do, though, the pre-wound bobbins have different colors and different amounts. So you can get a little 10-pack, or if you know you like them, go ahead and get the 100-pack. So you can get different amounts to try it out. But then once you're well and addicted to your pre-wounds of choice, then you could just get the big sections. So hopefully that helps. Will I have any long arm classes next year? We are in the works putting together a long arm event tentatively in March. As soon as we get details, I'll let you know. We have plans, but nothing concrete yet. But I promise I will tell you. Usually the live chat gets first dibs on all that kind of events. That's where I announce everything. So not like to bribe you to join or watch every Thursday, but that's usually where I'd make the big announcement, is live chats. So stay tuned. Do I have any tips on using a long arm with an 8-inch throat? Here's the deal. No matter what machine you have, you're usually going to find a quilt that has a block that doesn't fit in that throat space, unless you have like a really, really big throat space. I quilt on an 18-inch long arm, and blocks on point usually are too big. So when that happens, I'm going to pick designs that can be quilted in halves. So if you have an 8-inch throat, a 10-inch block, that means I'm not going to maybe pick a feather wreath to go in there. I might pick a design where I can quilt the top and then come back and quilt the bottom. You can also use echoing to make your blocks a little bit smaller so that it fits in the throat space, or you're just going to dance back and forth. Is it the end of the world? No. Does it take a little bit of time? Yes. But the more you work with it, the more you'll be able to figure out what fits in your throat space and what doesn't. I think sometimes, not specific to this person asking the question, but I think sometimes we don't use the machine we have to its full capability. We think, oh, if I only had the next big machine or the next bell and whistle, it'd be better. Now, do you want the next big machine? Then get it for sure. But you can still quilt on that 8-inch throat space. Just you'll pick designs that fit within it and you'll learn how to work around that. Have I ever done a quilt as you go with larger quilts on a domestic? I've not done whole larger quilts, but I have done enough to demo it. The quilt as you go technique is great because you can quilt smaller sections and then put them together. It's kind of like 6 in one, half a dozen in the other. Do you want to do the whole smush and push with the big quilt, or do you want to take the time to sew it together later on? And it just depends on your personality. So I haven't done a whole quilt, but I have done sections, and it's definitely possible, and it can make it easier for those smaller throat spaces. Do I ever worry about whether seams are pressed open into the side? I don't know. What do you think? No, I don't. I never press open because, let's be honest, I don't do a lot of piecing. I piece about 1 quilt a year, and that's about it. And I always press to the side because, I don't like to press open just because it takes time. I'm not the most precise piecer. And so it's funny because with our Build a Quilt Block of the Month, Joni helps us run it, and she is a retired home ec teacher, and she is precise on her piecing. And I love to get a rise out of her whenever I say stuff like, just don't even worry about pressing. It's fine. Just cut the point off. So I don't worry about it. And it doesn't quilt any different. The only time it could quilt different is if you have a bunch of seams coming to one point and you're going to get some bulk. Then you might want to press open. That would be one time. Do I use multiple bobbin thread colors for this challenge? Okay, so when I'm filming, I act a little different than I do when I'm quilting. I won't say a real quilt, but a quilt. I don't change bobbins when I'm filming for this challenge because it just takes time, and I'm just keeping the same medium gray in the back. However, if I were quilting this and I was like, oh, I really, I'm going to keep this. I'm doing this quilt for me or for anybody else, whatever, then yeah, you could change bobbin thread colors. Again, it kind of goes into that whole idea of, whatever you want to do. There is a lot of lighter background space on the challenge panel. So if you wanted to get maybe a medium color for the bobbin and a lighter color for the background, that might help. So might help you out. I have a sit-down long arm. What is a ruler base you're referring to? Yeah, a sit-down long arm, your whole table is a ruler base, so disregard that. I should have said it. If you're in a stand-up where you're moving the machine and not the fabric, you need a ruler base. If you're moving the fabric and not the machine, not a problem because your whole table is your ruler base. So thank you for clarifying. You're probably like, where do I put this ruler base? Do I have any plans or places I'll be teaching in 2024? Yeah, I think I'm going to be in the Villages, Florida in February. And there's a couple other places I can't think off the top of my head. One of the things that has happened really since COVID is I've cut back on traveling as much. Staying home for a couple years, I'm like, man, I kind of like my family. I kind of like my business. So I have cut back on the traveling and teaching a little bit, but I still do some because I really like staying in hotels by myself. It's great, I'm telling you. I remember when I would travel a lot, people would say, don't you miss your kids? I'm like, I'm not gone long enough to miss them. Like 3 days, perfect. But anyway, so I will be teaching some places. I've been saying this forever, but it will happen. We're planning to roll out a brand new website within the next 6 months or so. And that's going to have such cool features. And one of them will be a more robust events catalog where you'll be able to actually register for events right there. So I'll be sure to tell you when I'm traveling around there. I have a handy quilter. Do you completely remove the top bar when floating the quilt top? Oh my gosh, I got a funny story about this. So when I'm floating the quilt top, you don't use the top bar, right? So I took mine off, except when I had Susan Manry, which is an excellent, brilliant handy quilter educator. She came and she was like, and people that take their top bars off, da-da-da. I was like, okay, long arm owners, don't listen to me anymore. So I did completely take the top bar off. But she said, it helps stabilize the quilt. So you decide what to do with that. So I just took it off because it was in the way. But I have a handy quilter Avante that doesn't have the pole cradles or the clear view system. And if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, just ignore me. So that's probably why. How would you add a border after quilting the center if the quilt is too big for a long arm? Oh, at that point, it's like a quilt as you go, right? So you're going to quilt your quilt and you're going to quilt your border, but you're going to leave a little bit unquilted so you can join them. I would question whether you really need the border, but if you really do, that would be one option. And I'm sure that if the quilt is too big for the stand-up long arm, again, if you're moving the fabric, doesn't matter, you have as much throat space as you want. So hopefully that helps. I gotta tell you, I love the questions coming through, and I hope that you find it helpful, truly. But I gotta keep reiterating, I'm only the expert of my opinion, so don't feel like you can't do something different than what I say. I'll be glad to share my expertise and my experiences, but it's just a starting point for what works for you. So thank you so much. I have to tell you, we have wrapped up. This will be like last one of the year, so we get a little like emotional or whatever, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Whether you've watched the videos and gave them a thumbs up, whether you've commented or supported us by buying product, it's so appreciated. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I hope that you all have a safe and very happy, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, great New Year. And then I hope you make your New Year's resolution to enjoy machine quilting a little bit more, learn some dot-to-dot designs, and join me for the Free Motion Challenge starting January 2nd. Until then,